The profit of a chocolate bar can be modeled by the equation P equals to negative 0.3 n minus 7 squared plus 10.8, where P is the profit in thousands of dollars and N is the number of chocolates sold in thousands. What is the coordinates of the vertex? And explain what it represents. So first of all, what format is this in? Vertex form. So what is the coordinate of the vertex? So it's 7, 10.8. Okay? So if I'm looking at the x and y axis, right, what do the x and y axis represent here in this case?
What was the question?
The x and the y axis. So which letter is the x axis? Which letter is the n axis? Is the y axis?
P,
Okay, I'm asking for letters.
P and N. P for Y and N for X.
That's right. So this is technically what we write usually is y, x, yeah? So on the x-axis, I have the number of chocolate bars sold, right? And then on the y-axis, I have P, which is profit, right? So if you're looking at your vertex, 7 represents what? Number of chocolates sold to give me a maximum profit of 10.8. Now remember that they're in thousands, so I have to sell 7,000 chocolate bar. How do I know it's in thousand? Because it does say here, right? Where N is the number of chocolates sold in thousands. P is the profit in thousands. So I know that the 7,000 chocolate bar needs to be sold to get a maximum profit of $10,800. Do we understand this? What is the y-intercept, or what we say the p-intercept, and explain what it represents? So what is it? How do you solve for the y-intercept?
The profit, because the profit is the amount of money that you're going to be raising. No?
Yeah, but what is the y-intercept? What is it? How do you find it? What's the value of it?
No, what represent P, right?
Yes, but what is the value of the y-intercept? So is the y-intercept here? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Here? How do you find it?
By the maximum profit, no?
No. The maximum profit is not your y-intercept.
Are you going to make it standard?
You can. That's one way to do it. How do I find the y-intercept?
Expanded.
And if you expand it, how do you know what the y-intercept is?
The last number of the one.
Okay, that's right. Have we talked about this yet?
Yeah, that was the first lesson.
Okay, so that's one way to do it, right? What other ways do you find the y-intercept? What's the value of x at the y-intercept?
0.
Thank you. What do you plug in for n in this case?
0.
Yes.
I was half for, I said 0, 0, but
Ah, okay. Good morning. So to find the y-intercept, there's two ways that you can do it, and I'm going to show you both ways, okay? You can do it by plugging in 0 for n, right? And then this way it will be p equals negative 0.3, 0 minus 7 squared plus 10.8. That's going to be negative 7 squared, which is going to give me 49. Are you guys okay if I skip that step? I don't know why I wrote 10.9, not 10.8. So it should be negative 3.9, yeah? What does it mean that my profit is negative?
Increase. And it's less than what you expect.
So what's a profit, a negative profit? What does that mean? Are you gaining money?
No.
You're losing money, right? You're losing 3,900 in this case, right? So, did you guys get 3,900 or did you get something else? Let me just double check here because my calculator is. Yeah. Okay. Now, if I want to do it the other format where I have to expand, right? P equals negative 0.3 and then n minus 7, you write it twice. Yes? Plus 10.8. You guys remember that? To expand this, you write it twice. Then you're going to do n squared minus 7n minus 7n plus 49 plus 10.8. Multiply the negative 0.3 in. I'm going to collect like terms first. Distribute the negative 0.3 in. So as you can see now, it's in standard form. And then in standard form, the last term is my y-intercept. Okay? So, which one is easier? Unless they ask you to use the standard form to find it, I would use the first one. Plug in 0. Find the answer. Boom. Done. Right? It works for every single function. To find the y-intercept, plug in 0 for x. Okay? What does it represent? It represents the initial profit. Right? So the initial profit is a loss of $3,900, right? It's a loss because it's a negative, which makes sense. You made the chocolate bar or you bought the chocolate bar, but you haven't sold any yet, right? So all the money that you have spent, they're from your own pocket, so it's a loss. Now I kind of need this form in order to be able to answer the next question, so it's okay that we did both of them. So what's the next question asking you for? What are the zeros? So since you're looking for the zeros, what format do you want it to be in? Yeah. What is it called? So you have the options of standard, vertex, and factored. Which form do you want it to be in? To find the zeros. Factored, right? So you have three forms. Vertex form, you can find the vertex. Standard form, you can find the y-intercept. To find the zeros or the x-intercept, it has to be in factored form. Okay? So, factored form, I have to start from the standard form to be able to find the factored form. Okay? So what's the first thing that you want to do? So here's your standard form, which is p equals negative 0.3 n squared plus 4.2 n minus 3.9. Common factor first. You don't want that negative 0.3 out there. Okay? So you want to factor out the negative 0.3. If I divide each term by negative 0.3, what am I going to get? 14, negative 14n. Yes? Yeah. And then plus 13. Okay, so I did my common factoring first. Then what do I do after that? So my product is 13 and my sum is negative 14. What multiplies to 13 and add to negative 14?
Minus 13, negative 13, and negative 14.
That's right. 13 and 1 gives you positive 14, so it won't work, right? And I told you, if I tell you right now it's 22 degrees outside, good luck with that, right? It's actually negative. So negative 13 and negative 1, yeah? Okay, and that adds up to negative 14. So my factors, I know they're negative 13 and negative 1. So I can factor p equals negative 0.3 n minus 13 and n minus 1. So what are my zeros? 13 and 1. So here, let's put all this information on a graph and let's see how it looks like. Okay? It's going to be a rough graph. It's not going to be... Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know, I didn't understand the part that when you get the 14n and plus 13 to find the zeros. P equals minus 0.3.
So I factored negative 0.3 out, and I divided each term by negative 0.3. So I skipped a step myself, right? So when you factor the negative 0.3 out, you're going to have to divide this by negative 0.3, this by negative 0.3, and this by negative 0.3. Yeah? If you divide 4.2 by negative 0.3, yeah, try it. Here's your calculator.
That's why I was like, from where?
So, look at the graph. Tell me, what do you see from the graph? So what does that mean? What does that mean?
The parabola is crossing.
How much money are you making if you sell 1,000 chocolate bar? 0. This is how much profit you're making, right? You're making 0 profit. What do we call this? Breaking even, right? When you sell 13,000 chocolate bar, or when you make, I don't remember if the question is selling or making. When you make 13,000 chocolate bar, again, you are breaking even. So you're breaking even at 2 points, 1,000 and 13,000, okay? Anything between 1,000 and 13,000, you're making a profit, right? Your profit is in the positive now. Anywhere in between 1,000 and 13,000. The maximum profit you're going to make is when you sell 7,000 chocolate bar. Okay? Make sense? All right. So in order for you to be able to solve all these questions, you need to understand some key points. Because technically, in the question, they won't ask you, find the zeros or find the y-intercept. They won't say these words that we are used to. When they're asking you a word problem, they're going to use the word, find your initial profit or find your initial distance or whatever, right? Find your initial. Or they're going to ask you, what is your break even? Or when is the ball going to hit the ground, okay? Or they're going to ask you, what is your optimal, okay? So basically, altogether, you're going to have to understand what these words mean, right, when you're solving the question. So initial point means y-intercept. Break-even point or break-even money or break-even distance or break-even time or break-even profit, what does that mean? Your zeros or x-intercept, yeah? What's your maximum or minimum height, profit, distance? What part of your vertex though? The optimal value. Which is the y value of the vertex, yeah? The point at which the maximum or minimum occur, the vertex. Because it says the point, that means I want the vertex. Point means two values, x and y. Okay? You guys good? The path of a soccer ball can be modeled by the relation h equals negative 0.1 d squared plus 0.5 d plus 0.6, where h is the ball's height and d is the horizontal distance from the kicker. Okay, so we have horizontal height, and we have the the ball's height and then the horizontal distance. The question is asking you to find the zeros of the relation. That's right. Remember, zeros means factored form. Write it somewhere where you remember it. When they're asking you for the zeros, you're looking for the factored form. Okay? So, factored form, first thing I want to look at is common factoring in this case. So, that's going to be negative 0.1. If I divide each term by negative 0.1, I'm going to get minus 5d minus 6. So, if I divide this by negative 0.1, negative 0.1, negative 0.1. Then I have to look for two numbers that product and sum. Okay, what's the product? And then sum. And what multiplies to negative 6 and add to negative 5? Product is negative 6. Two times 3 will not work because they won't add 2. If you have, one of them has to be negative. Well, negative 6 and 1? Negative 6 and 1. Because remember, one of them has to be negative and the other one has to be positive. If you look at the green sheet, the large number has to be negative. Okay? So, negative 6 and 1. So that's going to be h equals to negative 0.1 d minus 6 d plus 1. So what are my zeros?
6 and negative.
So the distance in this case is 6 and distance of negative 1. Horizontal distance of 6 from, so remember that d represents the horizontal distance, yes? Yes? Okay, eyes on me, please. So I'm standing right here and I'm kicking the ball. The ball hit, find the zeros of the relation. What does the zeros of the relation represent in this case?
The initial value and the when
It's not the initial value. So you have a ball.
Well, the ball is kicked and when it hits the ground.
So when the ball hits the ground, when the ball is on the ground, these are the zeros, right? Zero horizontal, distance, vertical distance, right? So I'm looking for, where's my pen? So I have this scenario here, yes? When the ball hits the ground, this is my zero, right? Okay, now I got two values. One is at 6 and one is at negative 1. Why is it negative? Does that make sense? Negative 1 means it's behind the kicker, right? Because remember, the kicker is right here, is kicking, and the ball went up and then went back down and hit the ground. Negative 1 is the horizontal distance behind the kicker, right? Technically speaking, we can't count for that negative 1 because we don't really know if the ball was on the ground then, okay? Distance usually cannot be negative, same as time, right? In some scenarios, if we're looking at a bridge, for example, and then we put the axis in the middle, sometimes the distance can be negative. We're going to look at an example where distance can be negative. But in this case, distance cannot be negative. Time cannot be negative. We omit these answers, okay? We say that these answers, basically the ball was not on the ground. The ball was on the kicker's leg, okay? So in this case, we're gonna omit this one, and then we're only gonna take d equals to 6, and we're gonna say that the ball hits the ground at 6 meters away from the kicker. I said ER. What does these zeros mean in the context of this question? We've already discussed this. It means that when the ball hits the ground, right? So the horizontal distance from the kicker when the ball hits the ground.